Well, hi there. My name is Mike Slattery. I'm Director of the Institute for Environmental Studies, and thanks for taking time to look in on our webcast. I'd like to share a program with you in South Africa. This is a fairly new initiative. It's called the TCU Rhino Initiative. It's been going for about a year and a half, and I had the privilege this past year to take 15 students to South Africa and immerse them in this incredible landscape. And you may be wondering how on earth horned frogs are A, in South Africa, and B, what are they doing walking around a game reserve dealing with wildlife in general and rhinos in particular. So what I would like to do is just frame the issue, set the scene as to how this program got off the ground, and then give you an idea as to what our students are doing in the field and why I think this is really such a transformative program for our university. One of the things I like to do in my classes is talk a little bit about the mission statement of TCU, or at least bring the specific course that I teach and tie that to the mission statement. And so I'll ask two questions, pose a couple of questions to you here that I'd like you to think about as we go through this webcast on the TCU Rhino Initiative. The first one is what, if any, are the ethical responsibilities of humans relating to the natural environment? And the second one is, how do we achieve a balance between human values and interests and our obligations and responsibilities to nature, assuming that indeed we are ethically bound to preserve wildlife? So those two questions, which I asked my students in my freshman course, are two questions that were addressed specifically by this guy. This is Dr. William Folds. Will is a wildlife vet, lives in the Eastern Cape in South Africa, which is the country of my birth. And Will spends his time roaming the South African landscape in and among game reserves dealing with wildlife issues. Darting lions, rhinos, elephants, doing surgeries on these animals, helping to translocate wildlife from one reserve to another. And in the late 1990s, Dr. Folds and several other landowners in the Eastern Cape got together to establish the Amakhala Game Reserve. This was a landscape that was previously under agriculture, and they decided to bring this landscape together under this large bioreserve called the Amakhala Game Reserve. And that game reserve itself was really transformed in 2006 when this little fellow was born. The baby rhino here is Gazer. Gazer in the local language, Xhosa, means the naughty one. And apparently he was quite a naughty little kid. He was full of life, very rambunctious, and Will helped give birth to this rhino. And it was a monumentous event for this game reserve. People from all over the Eastern Cape came to witness the birth of this rhino, as it was the first of these glamorous megaspecies to be introduced to the landscape. That rhino was then moved in 2008 to a nearby reserve as he outgrew his mom. And then on a February morning in 2011, Dr. Folds got a call that there had been a rhino poached on a nearby reserve. And his heart sank, quite literally, when he came around the corner, and this was the scene that unfolded before him, because he knew immediately that this was Gazer. This was the baby rhino that he had helped birth and introduce to the Eastern Cape. And later that afternoon he realized that there was no way that this animal was going to be able to survive, and he lost Gazer. And that moment in Dr. Folds' life transformed him completely. It really moved the needle from being a wildlife vet to being a crusader for wildlife, and in particular for trying to protect the species which is undergoing catastrophic poaching in southern Africa at the same time. That story is beautifully told in a very short ebook called Poached, and I encourage you, if this story resonates with you, to download that book and read Dr. Folds' story as to how he got involved in rhino conservation. So what is this crisis, the so-called rhino crisis? You may have heard of it on the news. It seems to be making the rounds on many of the news channels at the moment. Well, it's a crisis that has really taken southern Africa quite literally by storm. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, rhinos were being lost on average at a rate of about one per month. Rhino horn, which is nothing more than compressed fingernail or keratin, basically the same stuff that's in your hair, has been used in traditional Asian medicine for quite a long time. And rhinos were being killed at the rate of about 10 to 12 per year. By 2014, rhinos were being poached at a rate of about 100 per month. In 2014, South Africa lost just over 1,200 rhinos to wildlife poaching. And this year, we're about just more than halfway through this year, that has continued to escalate, and the projections are that there will be 1,400 to 1,500 rhinos killed in South Africa. It's an astounding number when you consider that between the black and white rhinos, there are somewhere between 20 to 25,000 of these animals left in the wild. And if you're losing 1,000 to 1,500 per year, you can begin to see that we are moving towards a point of no return, where these animals will become endangered and ultimately extinct within our lifetimes. And we cannot be the generation that allows that to happen. The source of the rhino horn is Southern Africa, and South Africa in particular. About 80% of the world's rhinos are in South Africa. And these rhinos are ending up, the rhino horns are ending up in Vietnam. Some of these horns go into China and other Southeastern Asian countries, but Vietnam is really the key country for us. You may think, well, why are these horns, A, being chopped off the rhinos, and B, why are they ending up in Vietnam? Well, there's a whole host of reasons why the demand in Southeast Asia and Vietnam is so high. There's this perception that ground up rhino horn is a cure for hangovers. There's a perception that it is the Viagra of the Southeast, or Southeast Asia. And in fact, this was really fueled in the late 2000s when a Vietnamese politician went on television to announce that by consuming rhino horn he had been cured of cancer. And so that really fueled the demand for this commodity. What is fascinating about rhino horn is that when you look at the price of other commodities such as ivory, gold, platinum, and even cocaine that range somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 a kilogram for ivory, all the way up to $40,000 to $45,000 a kilogram for platinum and gold. When you look at the price of rhino horn, that is far superseding any of these commodities. $65,000 to $100,000 per kilogram. The average rhino horn is 4 to 6 kilograms. So what you're looking at is in excess of $500,000 sitting on the front of a face of one of these beautiful animals. And to a poacher or to someone who's impoverished, this represents, many times more than they would ever earn in a lifetime. The crisis is extremely complicated. It is not just as simple as hungry people chopping off rhino horns. These poachers we now know, are being fueled by crime syndicates throughout Africa and the Middle East, and that money is being sourced back so that they can continue their civil wars around the world. So that's the issue in a nutshell. And how is TCU responding? Well, I like this logo, which we are using, fighting from a farm, but my heart is right there. Our students were presented with an opportunity to spend a week with Dr. Folds on TCU's campus last April of 2014. And Dr. Folds came here and spoke to different groups on campus, but really worked with a group of students to unpack this crisis so they could begin to understand just how complicated this crisis is, what it means for our future generations, and very importantly, how can horned frogs actually help? At the end of the day, we have a mascot which is a horned animal, so it only seemed appropriate that horned frogs would be helping to save another horned creature, even if that is far away. So we are unpacking and delivering, if you like, this initiative called the TCU Rhino Initiative. Part of that initiative involves getting students into the field, and this is an absolutely critical component of the program, to take horned frogs and get them into the field so that they can experience what it's like to work with rhinos and begin to learn about wildlife conservation in a broader context. We're also helping a group called Saving the Survivors. Saving the Survivors is an incredible group of vets. It's very like Doctors Without Borders. They're a group of vets that give up their time freely to save animals that have been poached. And Dr. Folds and several of his veterinary students and other vets in South Africa are part of that organization. And parenthetically, when we were in South Africa this past summer, our students got to work with Saving the Survivors on hope. Hope is a rhino that has really been front and center of the media here for the last few months. She has been brutally wounded, and our students got to spend 3 hours in a surgical procedure with her. And you talk about transforming a student's life. I never have to worry about any of those students ever becoming a wildlife advocate again. I'm very excited about this third graphic here. This is our demand reduction campaign. Our VSA, our Vietnamese Students Association, have agreed to take this on as a 2-year part of their projects on TCU's campus, and they will be launching a awareness campaign starting in early November. And so that is absolutely fantastic. We have to reduce the demand, and our students are getting behind this cause. Wildlife security is a very important one. How do we monitor these animals, put collars on them, make sure that we can track them, and how do we help support the security efforts, because these reserves are now spending well over 50% of their budgets to just protect rhinos and have them monitored around the clock. Community ownership is another one. This is not just about preserving rhinos in a vacuum. It's extremely important that we get the local communities around these reserves engaged. Many of these villages around these reserves, the occupants of these villages have grown up through the apartheid years, and they've been completely disconnected from the value of wildlife. And so to engage these communities in wildlife conservation and preservation is a very important part of that. And then TCU is currently developing, and hopefully within the next few months will launch, a cyber awareness project. Another very important part of the TCU Rhino Initiative. This is essentially a cyber portal which people from around the world can come into and visit several components of the crisis. They will be able to go on a virtual journey in the game reserve. They will be able, for example, to log on and watch a surgical procedure live in the field and interact with the vet. So this is going to be a very interactive experience. So where are we working? We're working in the Eastern Cape, in the Amakhala Game Reserve. This is about 8,000 hectares. It's a fairly small game reserve, about 45 minutes from the city of Port Elizabeth. And I love this quote from a student that came on the trip this past July. Ellen Hall is an English major, and I took this from her field journal with her permission. I could never have imagined that I could fall in love with a place so quickly. Amakhala seems to have a way of wrapping itself around your heart and not letting go. And I think that's absolutely true of what all of these students experienced. And what was very important to me is to take students that represented breadth across the university, not just environmental science students or indeed science students. We had English majors, strategic communications, business, psychology, art, political science, geography, you name it. We had, I think, 10 out of the 15 students that went represented different departments and colleges on campus, because to solve this crisis is going to take multiple perspectives. The community model, as I mentioned, is very important. Dr. Foltz spends 1 day a week in a program called Coaching for Conservation. This is one that's close to my heart, and I think we really need to focus on how we get these students that are between the ages of 8 to 12 years old, how we get them engaged in wildlife conservation. How do we show and impress upon them not just how beautiful these creatures are, but how important they are for the survival of not just wildlife, but us as a species. I also mentioned that security is part of it. I wanted to show this slide. This is Dr. Foltz unpacking and using the TCU quadcopter. This is a small drone, and it is used to track wildlife once they're darted. It's very important once you dart an animal, whether it's a rhino or an impala, that you're able to track it and find it very quickly, because if you don't and they go off into the bush, you could lose them and they could potentially die from the drugs of getting them down in the first place. So this is an important piece of equipment that is being used to monitor wildlife as well. This just gives you a sense of what the view is like from the quadcopter. This, for example, is footage that was shot in July where our students were working on 2 rhinos. This was not a surgical procedure. This is a mom rhino that you see here that had been darted. Her collar had run out, the battery had died, and so she had to be darted and the collar removed. And on the left-hand side here on the screen is the baby rhino that also horned frogs are surrounding, and she was darted because she hadn't had any DNA taken for the DNA registry yet. So that's just that gives you a visual perspective of TCU students in the African bush injecting rhinos and working hands-on with these animals. So what I would like to do now is just give you a 4.5 minute video It's a montage really of clips from our trip this past July, and it shows you the procedures that our students were involved in. And when you think about, you know, the tagline for TCU, which is learning to change the world, I hope by the end of this video you will get an appreciation that these students truly are learning to change the world. The music, incidentally, I want to make comment of that, is by a group called Green River Ordnance, GRO. It's one of my favorite groups, partly because the bassist in that group is a former student of mine. He's a horn frog, and he gave us permission to use this tape.
When your bridge is burnt and you can't find a quiet mile, lost and deserted, leave it behind. I'll come running, when all your heart plays, we're on the shoulders. Can't help but feel like walking the same old line. I'll come running.
You know, incidentally, at the end of that video, as you see this footage from the quadcopter, which will give you an overall sense of the landscape that we were in, those two rhinos were very special rhinos. The mom's name is Tundi. She was brutally poached in 2012, and Will Folds was able to save her. The second rhino poached that day, Temba, died. And this past January, Tundi gave birth to the little baby there called Tembi, and her name is Hope as well. And it was incredibly special at the end of that trip. It was literally the last day on our game reserve. We were driving back to camp, and we finally saw those two come out. And I think that truly brought home to our students what this all means. That, you know, we often hear that one person can't make a difference, or it doesn't really mean much if we just save one animal, but it actually really does. The other thing I'll just leave you with is, as we look at the sunset out over Amakhala, you know, you're viewing this video because you're a horned frog and you're interested, I presume, in helping our students. We use the term transformative a lot on this campus, but in this case I really think it's warranted. The most rewarding thing I've ever done in my 20 years at TCU, bar none, was to be able to go to 3 students prior to that trip and tell them not to worry about the finances of getting to South Africa and getting them in the field. We were able, through my institute and our study abroad program, to fund them to go on this trip. It would have been financially impossible for them to do that. To see those 3 students, and all the students in fact, flourish in the field and come back and continue this fight to save the species has been absolutely incredible. So I'm delighted that you've been able to spend some time looking at this. I hope this has resonated with you. And if you're interested in donating, that would be fantastic, because no matter how small or how big your donation to TCU is, it goes to very, very good use. I can truly say that the money that we raise for this and all of our programs makes a difference in these students' lives. So when we think about TCU educating individuals to think and act as ethical leaders and responsible citizens in the global community, that's exactly what we do. Thank you.